So I thought I'd start with the prayer for chapter 15 because it just seemed like a good place. So hear this prayer. God of fresh starts, of new beginnings, of renewal and restoration. We awake to your grace, embraced by love unconditional. With each morning, you birth new possibilities in us, around us. We are surrounded by sacred potential. There are so many ways to love. May we rise to the day's call to listen for the aches, to give voice to the beauty, be a companion to justice. Amen. So, let's start with chapter 15 on sexuality. Here's what Becca wrote. What really became clear to me in this chapter on sexuality is how, when race and sexuality intersect, people of color who are not cisgender suffer doubly more so than the non-cisgendered individuals who are white. How distressing that the most severely oppressed, worn out by a life of expectancy of some 35 years, are trans women of color.
Yeah.
What did anybody else think about chapter 15?
Well, I learned a new word. I didn't know the word gaydar. Now I do.
Ah,
Yeah.
I'm
Like
always
that.
learning new words when I read.
I appreciated about the chapter. He really worked hard to overcome his gender racism. Very, very intentional, and if he had to do that, God knows the rest of us do too.
Yeah. Our family is living through this right now, as our 12-year-old grandchild about 2 years ago, or maybe a year ago, informed us that she's transgendering, and so our Sophie is now Sam. They moved from Florida to Connecticut because of the politics, and our son and his family are very supportive and caring, and we're trying to be. Well, some of the stresses that he's experienced are tough, and we're just trying to figure out how to be good grandparents to a transgender grandson.
It's a whole different ballgame when it's somebody that you love.
Yeah.
You know, in theory, it can be almost anything. When it's somebody that you love and care about, so much more in your heart and less in your head.
Yeah. Well, we've had some very good gay and lesbian friends for years, and you know that's been very, very. I feel okay about that, but the transgender, especially like you say, when it's a grandchild, as we're doing our best to find ways to support him, and just hoping and praying that he's able to find his way in this world.
The thing that struck me in this chapter was the section that he had about the control aspect, and how the just that idea of, I think it was where he was talking about how by making the meek white woman the standard for sexuality, it's not only it serves to reinforce the racism against black women, but also keeps and controls white women and their sexuality. To me, that pointing out that this is all a control thing and a power thing, in the way that these intersect, you know, that women of any color suffer when there's the control part of this. That was fascinating to me. I hadn't really thought about it that way.
We're back to that whole issue of power again, right?
Yeah.
Who has the power, who deserves the power, who gets the power, Who loses the power. No. How many of our
What-
churches even know what it means when we say cisgendered?
Rarely.
You know, if I get up in a pulpit and say, I'm a cisgendered woman of European descent, people look at me like I'm a crazy person.
Yeah,
Then if I add the heterosexual to that, then they're even more confused, right?
There were people that ask about that because I'm trying to think the person who did the poetry
Mhm.
at Synod, I can't think of her name, but she got up and described herself in all of the descriptive terms, and she used the term cisgendered, and there was discussion at the table about what that was.
Yay for the discussion at the table.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For
I think so.
somebody being willing to say, I don't know what that means. Tell me.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing, is that so often the conversation is lazy.
Mhm.
That
Right.
there's not a willingness to learn terms or definitions. At the bottom of all of my emails is a little thing that says why pronouns matter, and I've had that up there for years now. After a trans woman of color was murdered in Seattle, and the news media kept misgendering her, and it changed the story. They wanted to make it about him, who he was and his family and so on. It's like, no, she's dead. She was
Yeah.
murdered. It's her
Yeah.
friends that are grieving and her friends that are in protest, and
Right.
this is how she wanted to be identified, and to misgender intentionally, even at that point, is just laziness.
Yes, because gosh knows the newspaper would have known that she was transgender.
Yeah, well, I thought there was a section on page 199 that I had to read and read and read again, where he was talking about the where it says that these women are everything that they were not supposed to be in my patriarchal and homophobic mind, and then it listed all these things about queer persons and
Yep.
identity and understanding. And I think what became so challenging for me in that, and like why I had to read it again, is like, even as a cisgender gay white man, there were parts of this where it's like I recognize where my own place is feeding into the stereotype and the misrepresentation even of others around me, that um, gay culture can be wicked sometimes. I mean, it's just like in terms of just being mean within itself, and it is very much about power, and who's in control of whom.
Mhm.
It's kind of disturbing that in the in the gay social life network of people, you're reduced to so who's the guy and who's the girl in your relationship, that kind of thing, or or even to be more crass about it is, oh, so who's the top and who's the bottom, and that's the way you're referenced. It's just like so crude uh, in just how people are being identified. And so when I was rereading through so much of this, that this chapter especially, I got the whole thing about the power dynamic that's at play in this is to, in some ways, to put people in their place, and especially about those who are uh, transgender and persons of color.
Absolutely.
This
Intersectionality is so key. I'm sorry, Dan, go ahead.
this chapter made me realize my niece just got married. She married Alex, and they're both wives. So it was really interesting how they were married, and how the celebration around that was so natural, because it was all about how much they love each other. And the parents were very intentional about, they did a wonderful thing. They had all the tables labeled by number, and on those numbers there were pictures of both Haley and Alex at that age. And so you could compare them, like in their Halloween costumes at age 11, and in their different things. And so it was really wonderful to show how this was just normal and natural, and it was all there. We were just very fortunate that they found someone to love and be loved by. And it was just wonderful, and the whole family celebrated, and it was and there was talk about the struggle that they may face, but it wasn't emphasized. The emphasis was more on how we all support. And yeah, this made it more real of what they're up against. And I thought that was very helpful.
Yeah.
But the wedding and the reception was a real testimony of how it could be. How wonderful. Everyone just had a great time and celebrated. It's just a wonderful thing.
Anything else anybody wants to accent in chapter 15?
I thought it was just a reminder of the stereotypes that people carry around in our heads. And it reminded me of, we had a person from one of the churches up here that was a delegate at Synod with us. She's elderly, but she made the comment to us, and didn't mean this in a mean way, but she just reflected to us that this was the first time at Synod that she had been in the presence of such a large LGBTQ population. And the experience for her was an education, and but the way she said it was, and they weren't like in my face. I was thinking to myself, what did you think they were going to do to you? But I mean, I thought I was glad that she could reflect. She had a different concept now, because people do walk around. We all walk around with stereotypes in our heads. If you're going to have a flat tire, are you going to be nervous about the guy who stops in a suit, or are you going to be nervous about the guy who stops in leathers and tattoos? Right. So it was a reminder about the stereotypes. And I also was reminded of the privileges that come with cisgender and white cisgender. And I really related to his pet peeve about racist patriarchal white women standing behind racist patriarchal white men. They just annoy the crap out of me. And that it was a reminder to me that the issue is with the concept that the person is presenting, not the person themselves.
Again, the reminder that if we look at each person, as opposed to the category,
Right.
we
Right.
see each person as a person, and we don't generalize about a category.
Yeah.
He says that over and over and over and over again, and I keep hoping we're all going to get it. But we
He's not-
don't, right?
He's not the
No.
first person to say it either.
No, we've been saying it for generations.
Yeah.
Yet the reality is,
Yeah.
we still look at what we see and base a judgment on the category that's in our brain for that person.
Yeah, whether it's age or working class or where they live or, you know, male or female. I mean, all of that. It's like, oh, this is the box you have to fit in.
Right, but he kind of touched on heterosexualism when he said that. I have it footnoted. I can't tell you what page is it on because I'm on a Kindle. He said they opened the feminist world to me where queer love is wedded to heterosexual love in harmony. But this world scared me like they scared me. Opened by them, I learned though, and eventually I wanted to help them create that new world.
Mm.
So we are kind of defined by heterosexualism
Yeah,
in
that
many
page
ways.
200. I underlined that part too.
No kidding. Hmm.
But we do still do it, don't we? We make a judgment.
Well, you know, what I think about in some ways, like people who vote against their own self-interests.
Mhm.
It, by what thing that they're supporting because they're too lazy to know the issues that are at hand, or you know, well, anyway, I'm not to get in the political side of that, but it really is one in which it's like we're frequently supporting the very thing that is seeking to continue to promote the system of racism or promoting the homophobia, you know,
Economic injustice.
all of that. Yeah. And-
Reminds me of a billboard that I won't talk about that I saw recently that articulated that the person I know who's least for the working people of America was definitely the person who was in support of the working people of America.
Oh.
And I went, I don't know what America you guys are talking about, but it's not the same one that I live in.
Even there was even a recent thing that I saw just today, a meme that sort of fits right into this thing with the football player from the Chiefs who's now supposedly dating Taylor Swift. I saw I saw a side by side of his previous girlfriend and then Taylor Swift, and somebody basically saying, you know, he traded from somebody who dresses like this and looks like this, and it happens to be that his previous girlfriend is of color, and somebody who, you know, looks and dresses like this for somebody who's wife material and whatever, and like it's just even the implied sexual racism in that juxtaposition. You know, it's the same thing.
So I think it's I'm pretty sure it's the next chapter, but like when Steve was saying before, you know, how people vote even against their own interests. At one point he says, you know, racism is a problem of power, not immorality or ignorance, but there's some selective ignorance there.
Mm.
In my mind. Like they just don't want to take the time or make the effort to know. It's not that they can't or they don't have the ability to, but there's definitely ignorance plays a part in it in terms of just not seeking the truth, or so comfortable I don't want to be uncomfortable. I'm not sure, what all the motivations are for that.
Mm.
Really hard to question the beliefs you grew up with, right? And it's even harder to think. I'm sorry, I think that there are some people who slide through the world without thinking, right? They just do the thing that's most common and most comfortable for them, and they don't think.
Well, just think about how many people in our church have difficulty understanding even some of the basic stories, like Noah's Ark. And they hold on to the children's version of that because that is so comfortable for them. They can't go beyond that in their spiritual growth because it's uncharted territory for them. So then do that with something that is a hot button in our culture. Of course, they're going to recoil and stick to what is the standard, has been the standard for handed down from the last generation. It's hard.
Yeah, it is.
Change is
Suzanne,
hard.
can I share the conversation that I had with your congregation member who wanted everything to go back to the way it was,
Sure.
be traditional?
Mm.
So I preached in Nuremberg on Sunday, and I preached about stepping forward, doing new things, the usual message, right? About how tough change was, and none of us really like it. And so I was having this conversation with this gentleman. I said, well, I'm really a traditionalist. I said, I like the traditions. I said, how traditional do you want to be? He said, well, what do you mean? I said, well,
You're bad.
Jesus didn't have a church building. He wandered around on the roads and took care of people. And the apostles had churches. They sort of met in people's yards. How far back do you want the tradition to go? He looked at me and went, oh. I thought,
Not that far back. Yeah.
Yeah, not that far back. I only want to go back to 1960. But I thought, as I was articulating this, I thought, how often do we say, we like things the way they were? Well, how far back the way they were? Especially in the church, right? We'll go out 2 by 2 and heal people, and if they don't like us, we'll shake the dust off our sandals and on we'll go.
I always remind the people in my church, because many of them are baby boomers, that we are part of the problem because we were the rebellious generation. And they're like,
surely were.
We were the what, Dennis? We were the what?
Rebellious generation.
Oh, okay.
I said, remember the publication Ramparts and all those things that were out there that were countercultural magazines that we all picked up when we were in college, and what was his name, Ginsburg, who was kind of somewhat of a socialist and way out there, and we all latched onto those things to criticize the way things were and to kind of do what we're doing today in a sense, and examining the history and trying to redefine it according to the hippie generation, I guess. Whatever.
I don't want to redefine it. I wanted people to pay attention to it, right? So I was standing outside grocery stores with support the farm workers, boycott lettuce and grapes. Not because I wanted people to forget where we had come from, but I wanted people to remember what we were doing. And I think that for many baby boomers, and I'm of the older part of the baby boomers now, I just couldn't not speak what I saw as truth. Allow what had been said before be okay. That's me. I'm weird.
I think though that one of the pieces, and talking about where I mentioned about like just being lazy about things, is that
Mhm.
I had it made me angry in a way about my upbringing and the education that I received. I had this good liberal arts education, all this kind of stuff, and yet it I was it was right around 2005, I think, was the first time that I ever heard the story about the race massacre in Tulsa, Oklahoma.
Yeah.
Grew up in Texas, around Oklahoma, never heard that story. It was never taught in our education history class. Never in my college history class at a good Methodist liberal arts college, It's like never heard that story until I was at an event of other African Americans, and somebody mentioned about Tulsa. I'm like, what about Tulsa? And it's like, and I had someone of African American history essentially say, do the work. It's like, I'm not here to hold your hand and tell you the story. Go read, for crying out loud, get online, read the story. But it's like, but I didn't know what the story was to even know to ask about it. And so it's like, so part of what I find in Kindy's work over and over again, and I think he's kind of alluding to this, is that there are things that we didn't even know to think about or to ask about or to explore more deeply. Yes, it's comfortable to just, this is what I know. But the more that I delve into things, then it's like I'm finding myself like becoming increasingly irritated, frustrated, angry with the systems that are in place that have kept even those of us that want to know and want to be more just people, that want to be an anti-racist people, that we have to do our own work.
I'm
And
wondering,
we have to know what the work is.
We have to know what it is. That's right.
I'm wondering if it's so much, I mean, I just heard about Tulsa a few years ago too, and it shocked me, and why I never learned it. But I'm wondering if you can't do that work, at least talk with people, African Americans, and hear their stories, listen to them, and take seriously what they're telling you. And he goes on in another chapter then to talk about, you don't just listen and you respond, you become an activist. So yeah,
Right.
that's what's really important. It's not the story so much as where it leads you.
It was sure important for me to listen and hear their stories.
Right.
And I mean, there was an anti-racism training that we went to in Seattle where if you were white, one of the days for the entire afternoon, you were not allowed to speak. I mean, they were just absolutely serious about that. I mean, you just listen to the experience, the story, and the pain and the hardship of these around us, and then who are you now, as a result of what you've heard. And it's like, it break you down, I mean, it's just like, and that, like, talk about your sins of omission. there's like, I had to spend time in confession as they're like, I am a racist in my sins of omission, in that I didn't know and I didn't want to know. And that now that I do know, now what do I do? You know, and to what level am I willing to learn? That's like, there's a lot.
As related to this chapter, how many people in our pews know about Stonewall,
Right.
the Stonewall riot,
And
Or
what,
even the massacre in
or the
Shamokin.
massacre?
yeah.
In Shamokin. I mean, that's right in our backyard.
And
of
what
indigenous
version of
tribes.
that story do they know?
Pardon?
What version of the story do they know?
Sure,
Yes.
right.
You know, do they know that that it was begun by a transgender woman who threw the brick?
Mm.
Or did they know the whitewash story that was presented, you know, even on whether it was Netflix or Prime or whatever it was when they did the Stonewall anniversary,
Yep.
that had to be a white guy? Like, really?
Ah,
Even in our own story, we can't tell the truth about.
Again, because we judge the whole group, right?
Yep.
Instead of the one person. Instead of saying this person did a violent act, you now go, all transgender folks are violent.
Yes.
yeah, Kendi kind of uncovers how our culture has been doing this masquerade from the very get-go.
Mhm.
And it reminds me of, I always had the question, are we asking too much of the people? Because I know how my parents were, and they weren't, if they weren't educated beyond high school, they lived in that paradigm where you don't question. You don't question your government, you don't question people in authority. And now I don't think that historically true of all past generations, because if you look in American history, there's demonstrating in the streets for women's rights and other things at the turn of the 20th century. But I wonder if part of that is the collective psychology because of the Depression and World War II, or in the 20th century, that helped create that unquestioning. You don't question the way things are. And here, Kendi is unraveling it all, and that would make it very hard. I mean, we're fortunate that we've been educated beyond where a lot of our congregation has been. So they're still struggling with those values.
Although Dennis, I think, you know, what about the 60s? That was about questioning, and especially the Vietnam War led people to question and say, why does it have to be this way? So I think you got to look at that. Well, it's my generation that, you know, that thought that way. And I get in trouble sometimes for asking why, you know, why does it have to be this way? You know,
Well, I think we're also conditioned not to,
right?
because it's all part of the American dream. You know, if you're ambitious enough, then you'll be doing better. So when you have people who are not making as much money as others, it's their own fault. That's who they are. They just haven't worked hard enough. And that's not just people of color, which is why we have white impoverished persons who don't battle the system because they're fed the same story.
Right.
You know, so it's built into the American dream where you can be whatever you want if you just work hard enough, you know, and you're just motivated enough, which is hogwash, of course.
I don't know that I ever bought into that. I don't know that I did.
No, but that is pervasive around.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
as a cultural norm, and we,
Mhm.
you know, every election cycle, both sides will tout the American dream, so on, so on. You too can have this. That's like, what a load of crap.
Mhm.
I
Yeah,
mean,
I
for
think
some
it's one
people,
of things.
friends, some people, the American dream is the American nightmare,
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
So I'm going to move us on to chapter 16, or we're not going to finish these 4 chapters tonight. So now let's talk about failure. I love the quote, to understand why racism lives is to understand the history of anti-racist failure. Didn't change the systems. Andy's point is that we have to change the systems because anti-racist activism has to be rooted in power and policy change.
Yeah.
So Becca said, I'm fascinated by Kendi's critique of moral suasion and educational suasion, which he uses to insist again and again that the most important anti-racist work for us and the most important anti-racist work any of us can do is work to change policy. Quote that jumped out to me, sorry, I have an audiobook, so I have no idea of the page, about halfway through the chapter. Quote, to fight for mental and moral changes after policy is changed means fighting alongside growing benefits and the dissipation of fears, making it possible for anti-racist power to succeed. To fight for mental and moral change as a prerequisite for policy change
Mhm.
is to fight against growing fears and apathy, making it almost impossible for anti-racist power to succeed. The original problem of racism has not been solved by suasion. Knowledge is only power if knowledge is put to the struggle for power. An activist produces power and policy change.
Yeah, I think he says that theme over and over again. Again, it's not just racism isn't people, it's policy and power. And
Yeah.
the phrase that comes to me is, okay, if you get woke, how are you gonna act? I mean, that's what it seems he's saying is, how are we gonna act to change the system, policies and structures?
And I like that he quoted Du Bois when Du Bois called for Black people to focus on accruing power for themselves rather than trying to persuade white people to give them some.
Yeah.
Mm.
Back to my power is pie thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I
So I
don't think.
was, oh,
Go ahead. Go
oh,
ahead,
I
Matt.
was gonna say when I was looking back over so the things that jumped out at me about this chapter, I realized that I think I'm preaching one of them this week, but talking about the point that he made, how our failure to be self-critical is because it's easier for us to focus on the shortcomings of others than to think about our own.
Mm.
And how even when we sort of see ourselves as being on the quote unquote right side of things, if we are failing in our efforts, we still would rather blame those who seem to be working against us than focus on what are we still doing wrong.
Right.
And that was I thought a really profound sort of observation.
I think what makes it more profound too is that he's recognizing this in himself as he goes through this book.
Yep.
That he can't just educate, he has to act.
Yes. It's the thing that most impresses me about him. It's his ability to self-critique.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
And to say,
Yeah.
oh, I said
Which-
that
which-
wrong. I need to fix it.
And I think that is such a challenging thing. I know it was challenging to me as a pastor because I often think that the greatest impact that I can have is preaching and teaching on Sunday mornings or in book studies and trying to change one person's mind at a time. And he essentially is saying that that ain't it. That is not the most helpful work to be done. And so it's that, to me, it was, this section of the book left me feeling a little helpless in just what am I actually doing to help? And because I had, been like I said, under sort of the impression of the most that I can do is try to teach and change some minds. And he really poked a hole in that.
And this was a challenge for me too, because being in an area that was previous German Reformed, there's a strong sense of tradition where pastors don't get involved in politics. My audio is garbled. Can you hear that?
Well, we can hear you.
It,
Okay.
it's like it's moving back. It's happened a couple of times. It did with Suzanne as well.
Okay. So I'll make it brief.
You're not alone.
So I think this was a real challenging chapter for me, because I've always admired Professor Hartley at Lancaster's Theological for his activism back in the 60s and 70s. And he would travel to South Africa to help those against the apartheid. And in fact, many students at Lancaster came from South Africa in that time period. And I always felt kind of inept in that I never had the audacity to do that, and felt comfortable in this area because it's not requested of you. It's frowned upon. So this really challenges me as a pastor to step outside of the box, to take action.
I thought one of the telling parts was he was saying that some of the failure is that rather than there being a focus on changing policy and practice, that the desire is just to make ourselves feel better. So it's like, oh yay, I went to the protest. Yay, I did this. I stood outside against this group. I wrote an article to the letter to the editor. But like, what are the practices? To Alan's point, what are we doing? That's changing our behavior, or using our power to create a change that is something more than making ourselves feel better about a cultural change or an educational change. That where was, hang on just a second.
Page 210, he talks about feelings advocacy.
Yeah.
If instead of feelings advocacy, we had an outcome advocacy.
Yeah.
Equitable outcomes before our guilt and anguish.
I'm
My
trying.
favorite quote.
I'm trying to remember what the word was that was used. That it was something I hadn't heard of before, but where as white persons posting something on Facebook, or wherever it was in social media, was like, this is our act of doing justice, and feeling like that was sufficient. That there was that kind of level of advocacy. There's a word about for that I can't remember what it was. But it was essentially like the tokenism almost. Where we think like, oh yay, I'm jumping on the bandwagon, when it's not creating any real change.
Next, anybody else have something about failure? Chapter 16. Not, we can go on. Let's look at chapter 17 then, which is supposedly the opposite of failure, which is success. Becca wrote, Andy's proficiency in interweaving his personal journal is truly a gift to all of us. I was struck by how he spoke of working on a collection of personal stories of impacted people and layered that with a detailed description of the demise of Trayvon Martin.
Mm.
What came up for you here? I will just say in the discussion notes, the little picture that's there at the beginning of the chapter said racism is so American. When you protest it, people think you are protesting America.
Mm.
I've wondered about that. I have a tendency to watch a lot of British television. And I've wondered if they experience the same thing because their programs represent many more mixed marriages. And I just didn't know if it was as prevalent there as it is here.
Say different. I don't know that it's less prevalent.
Well, but
I mean,
a good example of that is when there's someone with a who is black that has a British accent.
Oh,
There's someone who is Asian who has a British accent. You know, and like, well, that's so strange. Where are you from? What do you mean, where am I from? You know,
Mhm.
it's like, I'm from here. No, originally, where are your people from? It's like, no, 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 no. You know? To where there's almost a sense of if we talk about what we see in our own cultural context and it doesn't fit the cookie cutter cutout of what the American life is supposed to be like, then it's as if you're poking the bear. It's not you're speaking against the very things that are it's like, well, America, like it or leave it, type mentalities. Like, that's just such nonsense. And yet there's
people been professing that for generations.
yeah, well,
Remember hearing that about anti-Vietnam War protesters.
oh yeah.
Now,
Issue is
people
issue is
misquote.
this. Go ahead, Jeremy. Sorry.
No, go ahead, Sharon.
The issue that he raises here is that we've got to work on dismantling racism, and I'm wondering if you had thought about whether or not PNAC could have a project or a focus on doing something.
I think we have a resource in the Lehigh Valley with power. I mean,
Yes.
reading
Yeah.
this book, kind of more than nudges, but give me a kick in the butt, because I've been playing around. I know Becca Stevens is very involved with the power. And I think that is the group that I think has the most impact on changing policy available to us, or I'll say to me. I'll just say that to me.
I think there are lots of ways that we can partner. I think one of the things that we as a conference have done is even to offer anti-racism training. Book studies, right? I mean, when I did white fragility years ago, gosh, it seems like because less time than that, but it might not have been. That was a challenging book for people to read.
Yes,
right?
yeah.
I think How to Be an Anti-Racist is another challenging book for people to read.
Yeah.
Now, the fact that there are 6 of you here out of 126 churches, we have work to do, obviously. But we haven't stopped working at it. I think is the other piece that's really important. You know, I don't want us to be a one and done conference. You know, where we do one study on a topic and then we're gone forever and we don't do anything else.
Like, check that box. We're
Check that box, right?
done.
And yet, I want us to check the box that we took the training. It's a really important thing, but it's not the only thing.
I'm thinking that the racism's connection with poverty
Mhm.
is critical. And
Mhm.
and Power does that. I know that. They're working on it.
Mhm.
But I don't know if there's a way to get it filtered down into the pews, you know.
The challenge.
Yep, that's the struggle. Yeah.
So
Oh.
I'm going to spend the rest of my life reading page 226 again and again and again, which is where he has the 8 successive steps to be an anti-racist.
Okay.
That's the page I'm going to read, like, should say every day, but probably won't read it every day. But that is a page that feels important to me because I need to remind myself again, praying about it or reading about it is not the same as doing something about it. That's the hard part. Sometimes the issue seems so big, right? Don't know what to do.
I also think it depends on where we are. I mean,
Mhm.
my church is not in the city,
Mhm.
but I can see, you know, we had one person who used to come to church. She's since moved out of town, but she grew up down there, but she was kind of seen as white trash.
Mhm.
I was surprised at some of the reactions I saw in the congregation.
Mhm.
That, you know, people that I've come to know is really giving and so forth. And they, you know, they would help with money, but not so much the friendship
Mm.
with that person.
Yeah.
So I guess maybe that's a place for me to start. I mean, I'm in a position where my church is, we just had the first Hispanic family move in town. So I'm not in the same situation as everybody else. And I guess I'm struggling to figure out just what it is I can do. But
I think educating yourself is a good first step, Suzanne. I think even mentioning, you know, that you're doing this book study.
Yeah.
Even just mentioning the title, right? Might cause somebody to ask you a question about, so what's an anti-racist? What does that mean? Which gives you an opportunity to have a conversation.
Yeah, when I was mentoring you, Susan, and I was more involved with what you're doing, I mean, you were involved with the refugee resettlement, you were as a general synod, and you brought all that stuff home and you would talk about it in church. And I think as somebody, I don't know what Steve or Dennis said earlier, you were so impressed because your professor went down to South Africa. If they see what you're doing, I think, and we share what we're doing, that's a good start.
Right. Yeah.
There are certainly issues of poverty, Suzanne, that you could start to address with your congregation that ultimately are going to impact people from a variety of racial and ethnic backgrounds.
Yeah.
'Cause there is still this assumption, I grew up in a lower middle class rural town. My dad was a laborer. He was an operating engineer. He drove bulldozers. My mother took care of kids at home and waited tables. Wasn't like, you know, I was the first person in my family to go to college.
Mm.
The difference my education has made for me, for the opportunities that I now have. But I also know that's not an opportunity everybody has.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Even every cisgendered European descent heterosexual woman
Mhm.
doesn't have the choices or hasn't had the chances that I have had.
Yeah.
Even saying that out loud, I'm saying that out loud because I need to remind myself, like, it's not the same for everybody. It's just not.
Well, I don't think you were, I think it was one of the nights that you were out, Bonnie. I bought the updated book.
Mhm.
And so I took my first edition down and I left it. We have a book room at the
Ah.
church, and I left it in the church. Come to think of it, I didn't see it where I left it, so I'm gonna have to see if somebody picked it up. It would be
Hmm.
interesting.
Well, you could
Or
have a conversation with them about it.
Yeah.
Move,
You could
move
ask your
it.
congregation and start a conversation in the pulpit. Who took my book?
Who moved my anti-racist book?
That's a good thing. You're right.
Mhm.
I thought there was another copy of this wandering around here somewhere. Has anybody seen it?
Mhm.
Sort of like,
What?
Where's Waldo?
One of the things that I liked in this chapter was that Kendi tried to put racism into kind of a metaphor that would make it a lot easier to understand. And he was kind of arguing against the idea that it was a disease and that it is more of like an organ that's not functioning properly or something, or more like it's not a disease. And I thought that was really interesting because then at the end, he's he's is in 18, I think he says it's like a cancer. It is a disease. So
Yeah.
that's what I like his approach because it's authentic. He's discovering too, as we're discovering. I just enjoyed that.
Thing I appreciate most about him, really, his ability to self-critique is amazing.
Mhm.
His ability to publish his self-critique.
Mhm.
Critique. Many of us would self-critique, but we would keep it private, right? Wouldn't put it on the pages of the second edition of our book.
Have any of you looked at the YouTubes critiquing Kendi? There's some very interesting YouTubes
Oh.
about conservative people that critique him. And I mean, it's all the stuff we've been talking about here tonight about these people, where are they coming from? But he's out there, and there's a lot,
yeah.
a lot of the conservatives are really, stirred up by what he's offering.
I understand his approach is part of his generation. Um, there's been an art movement that is very attuned to this. One of the things that I struggled with, and many artists struggle with in your development, is that you have to be somewhat of a perfectionist. It has to be well done. It has to be working towards your masterpiece. This present day way of doing art, some artists don't work that way. They'll do a drawing and then they'll hang it in the gallery and they'll walk in and they'll add to it or they'll subtract from it. Because even any artist has everything you create, you're never happy with it. There's always something. But today they have the privilege and acceptance that that's okay. So they go in and change it. And it constantly is evolving. And that's kind of how Kendi is approaching this. His
Mhm.
book, his ideas, his thoughts evolve and they just keep changing. And he's doing it. It's wonderful.
An interesting correlation, Den. Thanks. That's helpful. I can't really see Leonardo da Vinci walking into his, place where one of his paintings was hung and doing it.
I could because he didn't make a lot of paintings that were permanent and he worked for like 13 years on many of his paintings because he was always changing it.
Maybe I'm thinking of him contemporarily walking into a museum and changing a painting.
Well, that
The
is, and
curator would
that's,
have a heart attack, but after that,
well, and that's the paradigm. We believe that everything is made perfect. And that's just as like the American dream. It's a fantasy.
that's all. Anything else from chapter 17? If not, we're going on to chapter 18, which is called Survival. And here's what Becca has to say. After criticizing a speaker for describing racism as a cancer, Kendi comes round to claiming that description as his own, infused with his experience of his wife, his mother, and his own experience with cancer. To me, the fortitude and resilience Kendi demonstrated in all of that personal anguish is exactly the fortitude and resilience necessary in the fight for changing racist policies into anti-racist policies. Speaking for myself, as a white-skinned woman, because of my privilege, I have not had as many opportunities as people of color to develop my fortitude and resilience muscles.
He talks about the source of racism is self-interest.
Mhm.
And he said that he goes on further down, the heartbeat of racism is denial. And those two things, I think that says it all.
Mm.
Self-interest, power. Yeah.
Power, ego, inability to self-critique.
Oh,
I love
the
that
other-
quote too,
oh.
Sharon. The source of racist ideas was not ignorance and hate, but self-interest.
Right.
Sorry, Matt, go ahead.
Well, no, I just this metaphor was just the way that he tried to unpack it was just so brilliant, I thought, because you can picture the ways that religious folks respond to these things in similar ways. And you think about the people who, their response to cancer is, well, let's pray, right? Let's pray for it and we'll pray it away, kind of a thing. And it's like, but if prayer is your only thing, and you're not trying to treat it as well, like it's only part of the thing. And I think the way that he was able to sort of say, and anti-racism and fighting against racism is like that. We like prayer, sure, prayer, fine, teaching, fine, but like unless we're applying the medicine and actually treating the problem, it's not going to accomplish a whole lot. Yes, M&M treatments are gonna sting a little bit. Some of those treatments are gonna make us more stuck with trying to wrestle through the things that are going on. And I think it's just it was just such a powerful way to be thinking about the work involved in trying to treat the problem that we're recognizing this.
I also thought it was interesting how he wove all that, and then at the end he kind of brought back that hope thing that you were talking about, Bonnie, at the end of the panel discussion. Like he talks about, you need to believe it can happen. You know, you need to believe that we can make this different, and then you need to fight and do what's needed to make it different. And I thought, you know, it reminded me of his attitude at that panel discussion when he was talking.
He is a man of hope,
Mhm.
really is.
Yeah.
He doesn't believe that it's hopeless. I love the quote where he says, "We can survive metastatic racism.
Mhm.
Racist power is not godly. Racist policies are not indestructible. Racial inequities are not inevitable. Racist ideas are not natural to the human mind."
Mhm.
Sorry about the dog barking. Somebody's outside.
I
That's
appreciate
checked out. Go ahead, Steve.
I just I appreciated. I mean, it seems simple at the end after all this, but at the very end, in the final paragraph, he said, let me find it here again. What gives me hope is a simple truism. Once we lose hope, we're guaranteed to lose. But if we ignore the odds and fight to create an anti-racist world, then we give humanity a chance to one day survive, a chance to live in communion, a chance to be forever free. I mean, just that last part where it's like, what gives me hope at the end is that there's this potential that even with all that we have uncovered and are discovering, and the self-critical awareness, so on, that there's still, instead of it's too far gone, there's nothing we can do, oh well, it's what gives me hope is, that there's this simple truism. If we lose hope, we're guaranteed to lose. Like just what that power of hope for creating something collectively different. And I just think about how true that is in so many different settings. I mean, when we talk, like, how often do we bemoan the decline of the denominational Christian faith as a whole, across denominations? This is the way it is, and yet, if we give up hope that the church can be something new and refreshing, life-giving, if we give up hope for that, then there is not hope. There is not church. There is social gatherings, but there is not church.
It gives us a
Yes.
reason to speak the truth and accept the response that we can't go there,
Mm.
but keep speaking and keep speaking the truth, because
Yeah.
it's wonderful. That statement was, I think we all need that statement.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe that's the second one I'll read every week. I always have been a minister of hope. It's in my DNA, I think. It's not that I'm a mind over matter person. It's not that I'm impractical. It's not that I don't know that things will be challenging or difficult. It's not because I've had an exceptionally easy life. It's because I don't believe in giving up. And the piece of me that will not give up is the piece that's anchored in hope. Church might be in decline. Okay, God's going to do something different with the church. I don't think the church is going away. It's going to look different. It's going to behave differently. It's going to be new. But it's not going away. Church is not gonna die.
That's right.
The church were
Like
gonna
a-
die, it would have died when all the churches Paul planted died. Yeah.
There's a lot of buzz. There's a lot of buzz on YouTube, and I know that's not a highly reliable source. But some of those TED Talks and symposiums that are on there, they're speaking about how this information age has brought the whole generation into a time of loneliness and separation rather than pulling them together because most of the connections aren't authentic. So there's a lot more depression and detachment, and as people are people are beginning to now try to seek ways of moving beyond that, and that means they're looking for healthier ways, which opens the door towards a revelation in spirituality, because all that we proclaim about loving your neighbor and taking care of your neighbor is rudimentary in finding purpose and building your spiritual strength. So we may be on the cusp of a renaissance. But it's not going to look like our traditional church. And we need to be prepared to and be where people are so that they're welcome to come in or gather wherever to help people along in that new rebirth. So I'm excited about that. I think there is evidence of that all over. And we just have to not figure it out. We just have to move with the flow, follow God where God's sending us. So
Be open
that's
to the spirit.
right.
Well, and in Kendi's tradition, I guess it defines how I think that's part of the reason he does all those definitions. How do we define church? If we define it by the attendance to our buildings,
Mhm.
it's declining. But that's not what church really is. So church is not necessarily on the wane. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
I think that's
Right.
why he made it an effort to define everything so clearly.
And people still seek the functions of the church as they understand it, for help, for community. They constantly call to see if there's a clothing drive or if there's food, or if there's something that can help them. So that's a good sign. I mean, that is a good thing because that is part of what we do.
They understand that the church is about compassion.
Yeah.
You haven't read Hear Us Out, book I co-authored with 7 other people. The 3 primary findings that I would tell you that we discovered about people who are 18 to 35-year-olds and what they were looking for. First is true community, true, authentic community where they could belong. So no, they're not finding it on social media, but we know that. 2, they're looking for a way to make a difference in the life of people, even if it's only one person. That's the second thing they're looking for. So mission is key, community and mission. And the third thing is a safe place to ask questions.
What?
Safe place to ask questions,
Okay.
where in fact they won't be judged for asking them. So that if they ask the question, well, why does God allow evil? Nobody's going to look at them funny. It's going to open their eyes and their mouth and have a conversation about it.
Right.
They're not looking to sit in a pew. It's not their thing, right? And I use my son as an example all the time, and if he knew it, he would hit me. But in the last church that I served, I think he came for my installation service and for Christmas. He was not a church person. If I called him and said, we're having a community dinner, he was a chef then, he would say, okay, Mom, I got the menu. We'll get the shopping done. How many people do you need us to bring to serve? And I wouldn't have to think about it again. He would just take care of it. We write a check for the ingredients, right? The community meal. Or if I called him and said, we're doing a habitat project, he'd say, oh, good. I got 4 guys with trucks that have tools. Where are we meeting you? He would come and do a mission anywhere. He would sit at dinner with me and a dozen of his friends, and we'd have 4-hour theological conversation. To him, that was church. He wasn't going to sit in a wooden pew at church in a building with stained glass windows, singing hymns written in the 1800s and doing a liturgy that made no sense to him. So we need to be different than we are. We need to provide those 3 things, and we need to tell people we're providing them, right? That you can have a chance for real community, that you can make a difference in the life of someone around you, and that you can ask any question you like, and no one's going to think less of you. Seems like a simple, difficult thing to do.
Yeah, exactly.
Because sort of what Kendi's saying about becoming an anti-racist, right?
Yeah.
Seems like a simple, difficult thing to do.
Yeah.
And it has to be about more than talking or thinking. Anything else you want to share? Overall impression about this chapter?
I found in the very beginning of reading this book that it was uncomfortable reading his story. And I questioned, why do I have to go through that? But at the same time, I was learning more about the culture of those of African descent.
Mhm.
And I thought I knew enough because of my friends who are descendant from Africa. And I was in South Africa with a seminary experience and was hosted by Native Africans. And so I've been immersed in many different cultural settings. So I thought I knew, but I did not know his generational differences. Being what he's maybe 40 or a little over 40, which is my son's age. So it was really enlightening. And as we navigated through the book, it became more and more apparent how this weaving together is crucial to understanding racism and how to be an anti-racist, and kind of invites even a different generation, the boomer generation, to be able to do the same thing, to work through that process from our experiences. So I really appreciate this book, this work.
Mhm.
I've really
Why-
appreciated this
Go ahead, Matt.
forum for being able to discuss. I had at some point this book came up onto my radar, and I had listened to the audiobook version of it, just riding on my commute in my car. But having a chance to listen back through it again and then discuss it with other folks who were also sort of willing to dig in and to be honest about our own connecting points and shortcomings and different things, I think added a whole nother level to how I've been able to digest the book compared to the first time that I listened through it. So I've appreciated having folks to discuss it with.
Matt, I always think it's better you get a chance to talk, but that's the extrovert in me. Some of you introverted people are probably just fine listening to the book without talking about it. I can't do anything without talking about it, just so you know. Well, I thought I would close us with the prayer that's for chapter 18, because I think it actually fits his sense of hope. So
Mm.
let's pray as we close, and we'll try to ignore the dog. Each time we grasp the hand of another, who are there, loving God, in the flesh entangled. Our hands holding hands show us a prayer too rare, sight of the holy, where the reaching out and the receiving, the grasping and being grasped, need to be held and the needing to hold, all get perfectly mixed up. Make this hand-holding prayer a returning to that which is always true, but so rarely spoken to in the language of flesh. We need each other to survive. We need each other. Amen.
Can you share that with us?
Sure.
Email? That's beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The prayers in this discussion guide are marvelous. I should just mail you all the discussion guide. You'll have them all. So that's what I'll do. I'll give the discussion guide to Patty. She can email it all to you, along with the last recording. And if you want to hold a book discussion in your own congregation, you'll have the same discussion guide that I had to use for this one.
Be awesome.
Might want to recommend that they all purchase the same edition of the book,
Yeah.
which might help us find page numbers, Beyond that, it's all good. I want to thank you all for being a part of this. This has been a very meaningful time for me. I'm sorry that I missed a couple of weeks with you, but I hope it has also been a meaningful time for you.
Thank you, Bonnie.
Yes, very-
Thank you.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
thanks so
And
much.
thank everybody. Yeah, thank all of you folks too. It's been nice to meet all of you in this interaction.
Be blessed for the evening. Get some rest, Sharon. Well, if you didn't sleep last night, you need to sleep twice as much tonight.
I know. Good night.
Good
Good
night.
night, friends.
Night.
Take
Take
care.
care, folks.
Bye.